It's been almost 30 days since I treated the reef tank behind me with fluconazole, and today I'm going to tell you how it went, why I'm so happy with the results, what I would do differently next time, and at the end of this video I've got a sneak peek at the next tank I'm working on right now. So let's jump right into it. So just so we're all clear, this is not a product that I was paid to use. I did my research on forums, Reef to Reef, tons of different places to try to figure out what was really gonna work best for me and my tank. And at first, actually, my biggest problem was trying to figure out what the issue was in terms of what was causing the problem and what the problem was. So some people were saying it was bryopsis, while it really looked like hair algae, and I think I had a 99.9% hair algae problem and a 0.01% bryopsis problem. I only saw like 1 or 2 little strands of bryopsis, but this is primarily targeted at bryopsis, so through treating the hair algae, the bryopsis was treated as well. But so I've got this terrible hair algae problem. So why do I have this problem in the first place? Well, most problems in reef tanks and aquariums in general are caused by an imbalance of nutrients, of elements of some kind, basically an imbalance in general. I think one of the main problems that I had was just not quite enough fish in this tank. There wasn't enough nutrient input. I don't know if I could really feed them more. They were basically getting nori all day long, plus frozen food. I haven't been feeding them pellets recently just because of dry food generally has a higher phosphate content, and phosphate is one of the driving factors to why you could have a nutrient imbalance. So I could either have added more fish or fed them more. And I did add a couple more fish, wasn't really enough. We did end up adding a yellow wrasse and a fox face, but it was kind of too little too late. Once at that point there was kind of too much algae to really have made a difference. And one of the primary things that I think I screwed up on in the beginning was I was trying to fix a bottomed out nutrient problem where nitrate I was trying to get back in check by dosing sodium nitrate, which was working. The corals would look better for a little while, but the algae would just consume all of that nitrate almost immediately.
Lay off me, I'm starving!
So when I was dosing the nitrate, it was really just going straight to the algae, and none of the other animals in here, the corals, couldn't use it fast enough. So then we tried more cleanup crew. We added some snails, we added a conch, I added an urchin, and then eventually we added 2 more urchins. So this tank right now is pretty well stocked with invertebrates and herbivorous fish that should eat a lot of the algae. But at the time, the cleanup crew was not really up to the level that it needed to be to combat the algae, and the hair algae was just growing so fast. The tangs didn't want to eat it anymore. There was just so much of it. It was becoming a really big problem. So at this point, I had pretty much tried literally everything I could think of. I was removing phosphate with Phosguard. I was trying to add nitrate to balance it out. We got more cleanup crew. We got a few more algae eating fish. We were feeding more. Protein skimmer was off at this point. I was in the tank siphoning out algae, pulling it off the rocks multiple times a week, and it would literally just come back almost the same amount the next day. So it was like just this endless cycle of trying to hand remove it, hoping that the cleanup crew would eventually be able to catch up. And I do actually think that if I had been consistent doing what I was doing, that the level of cleanup crew I had would have actually been able to take care of it. I could have even added some more snails, some more types of snails. I think 3 urchins might sort of be good for the balance in this tank the way it is right now. When I had all the algae, I could have gotten more urchins, and then once the problem is taken care of, given them away to somebody else. But so I really just didn't know what to do, because with the algae just consuming every bit of nitrate that was in the tank, as soon as I added it, or in the form of food or sodium nitrate, it was just literally gone. The algae would grow.
I think I'll eat it now! I think I'll eat it now! Oh!
I didn't know what else to do. So one of the only things I could really find to treat this was fluconazole in the form of different products like FluxRx. Basically prevents the algae from being able to metabolize in some way, and so it stops growing and then it dies. In terms of bryopsis, it kills it completely. With hair algae, it will sort of just stop it from growing. It will die back, but there's still gonna be hair algae in your system, so if you don't correct the underlying problem, then you're gonna get more hair algae later. So that was really the main thing. I'm trying to correct a problem, the water problem, or the imbalance that was in my tank, and then sustain that long term. So what the fluconazole was able to do is sort of stop the algae from replicating so that I could do more hand removal, and then the cleanup crew and fish could take care of the hair algae, which is exactly what happened. So this is a 125 gallon tank, and I did 1 full dose. I let it go the full 10 to 14 days to see any results that might take place. I really wasn't super impressed with the first run of fluconazole. It really just sort of stopped growing, but it definitely didn't remove it. So I knew if I just kept with one dose and didn't change anything and let the fluconazole sort of dissipate in the system, the hair algae was probably just gonna come back like it was before. It might not have, but it was probably gonna come back. And I didn't know if I had 3 doses in here. So I went ahead and did a second dose. Thankfully, 2 doses was just enough, and sort of around maybe the 7-8 day mark, 10-day mark, on the second dose, I started to really see what I was hoping to see all along, and just the algae stop growing, recede, and then you could see huge patches of rockscape starting to be able to be seen again. The snails, the urchins, my conch was just going along, and you could see just the huge parts of the rock were clean, and day by day, they would uncover more and more rock. At that point, I'm just waiting for them to sort of take care of the rest of it so that I can do one big clean, make sure there's no big clumps of algae floating around anywhere, make sure everything's clean. And towards the end, it sort of like almost melted off the rocks, so there was just tons of algae floating around. It would get stuck in the power heads, it would get stuck in the overflow, it would clog the filter socks. The stuff would turn into like slime and just clog everything. So here's something that was really strange to happen that I kind of didn't expect. I was expecting to have removed all of this algae, and by removed, I mean the animals in the tank eat it, it sort of dies back on its own, goes back into the system, and I was expecting I have to do a water change, remove a lot of the nutrients, and maybe use more phosphate remover. And what I found was, so after all the algae died back, I did a phosphate test, and it was almost lower than it was with the algae. Same with the nitrate. The nitrate was basically at 0 once again, so then I ended up dosing a bit more nitrate, and we finally got the nitrate to not bottom out after like 3 hours. I was dosing like a few milliliters of this solution that I mixed up into the tank every day, and eventually we sort of have this low level of nitrate around 3 to 5 parts per million, and that's where it's hovering right now. But the phosphate was just so strange that we could take all of this algae and turn it back into nutrients and it not raise the phosphate. That's really what you see on the forums. Everyone says, I have an algae problem, but I'm not testing any phosphate or nitrate, you know, what's the problem? And the consensus is usually that you do have a nutrient problem, it's just bound up in the algae. But it was really strange that when we finally got rid of all the algae back into the system, do a test for phosphate, it's not there. So I don't really know why or what the algae was feeding on, and sort of that kind of makes me wonder why we even had this problem in the first place if my phosphate was never really that high. And by that high, I mean like 0.04, I think was the highest it ever got. When the algae was in here, I think it was 0.03, 0.02, and at the end of the treatment, it was like 0.01. So you tell me, I'm not sure where all that phosphate went, or if it was even in here to begin with. I don't know. I just know that when we finished the treatment, I was actually able to get some nitrate back into here. The corals that were looking like really off, you know, they were looking pastel colored, really light, like they lost a lot of their color. They finally started to get some of their color back, and they're looking a lot better now.
I worked very hard.
Right here we have one of our urchins. This is a pincushion urchin, and he's one of the guys that helped clean this tank. There's another white guy back there. See if we can find the tuxedo. Not sure, I haven't seen him yet today, but I really do think that you can achieve success getting rid of as much hair algae as I had even with simply a cleanup crew. If you're not worried about breaking off corals like I was, I literally would get in here and do so much damage. Like I would knock corals down, I would break pieces off. Some of the more delicate corals that would just not do that well when it came to like, you know, getting in between them and trying to suck the algae out, I would just bump into stuff. I was really annoyed with the amount of damage I was doing in the tank. If that wasn't the case, and I had more patience and we weren't losing corals because of the low nutrients, we could have toughed it out and let the cleanup crew do their thing, and I think we would have had basically the same results. It just would have taken a little bit longer. The urchins have been doing a really good job of moving the gorgonians around, or whatever is left of the gorgonians. They were so difficult to clean when I was in here removing algae, and the pieces would just break off. There's some back there in the back. You probably can't see that. So there's a chance there's still some in here that we can reposition eventually, but they really took it the worst. They took the cleanings very poorly. They would snap off, get sucked up in the siphon. They were not handling it, and probably with the lack of nutrients as well, they didn't appreciate that. So overall, we hardly lost any coral in this tank. You can see the Fiji yellow leather right now is looking really good. So fluffy, I love this coral. I had to do some fragging of this zoa. It has been spreading profusely, so we have plenty of frags of this that I need to get rid of ASAP, either sell or take to a local fish store or something. We have some of this as well. I'll probably put some on Facebook and see if anybody will take that. The hammers are doing great. The torch is doing great. Look at this Ghani down here, has absolutely exploded. So he was like 6 different pieces. So this is what this guy looked like when I first put him in, because I destroyed him trying to remove him from the frag plug. There's no excuse for these to be so hard. What in the? As you may know, if you frag tiny pieces of coral, they grow much faster than they do if you frag larger pieces. So having these tiny little pieces here has caused this whole mass is on like 3 different frag plugs, but there was like maybe 2 or 3 pieces per frag plug. So it's huge right now. As you can see up here, we have a piece of bird's nest. We have, well, they were 2 little specks of bird's nest last year, 2 frag plugs that were right here. And this guy has absolutely exploded. He's probably 5 inches by 4 inches wide. And that was just 2 tiny little pieces. And like, we haven't had the best conditions in here recently. So as you can see, if you want to maximize your growth in corals, frag tiny little pieces and let those pieces grow out, and they will just explode in your tank. So if I could do this again, what would I do differently? Well, for starters, I'll probably always have an urchin in my tank going forward, at least 1 urchin, and some decent cleanup crew with snails that actually do something. You know, the cleanup crew is essential. And I'm not talking just hermit crabs, because whatever. They're almost irrelevant. Like they sort of do eat algae, but there are so many better algae eating cleanup crew members than hermit crabs. The only thing I could really do differently next time is just take action sooner, I think, than I did last time, because, you know, I would see algae here and there. We had some red slime, some cyano, and sort of all of those things are just symptoms of a nutrient imbalance that I just wasn't paying attention to enough. But if you're wondering if you should try Fluconazole or FluxRx or any of these Reef applicated Fluconazole treatments, I would say yes. There's really not a downside that I'm aware of to treating most tanks. I didn't lose any corals to the Fluconazole. I would try to make sure that you're testing often so that you can catch any nutrient spikes that you might see or changes in your tank because of all of the die-off that the Fluconazole is going to cause. So if you do treat with Fluconazole, at the end, you're going to want to do a water change. I just yesterday did a 25% water change, 32 gallons, and I'm also running some activated carbon right now just to pull out anything that might be in the water caused by the algae dying off. They can sometimes release toxins and stuff back into the water, so we're running some carbon just to make sure there's nothing bad in there. And yeah, so going forward, we're just going to make sure we have nitrate. We're going to add some more fish. I'm going to try to replace those gorgonians that we lost. Honestly, there's not much else I would want to do to this tank right now. It's looking really good. I'm really happy with it. All of the fish are healthy, the corals are healthy, the water is just crystal clear. I'm not running a skimmer right now until we get more fish or we start to see some nitrate building up in here. I'm not going to turn my skimmer on. A couple of the tanks, by a couple I mean there's 2 in here, the tanks are getting really big, and I'm about to tell you about the next tank coming to the channel. I'd like to have a place where we can move fish. Maybe we get something for this tank that turns out to eat coral, so it has to go somewhere else, and I don't want to just get rid of it, so we want to keep it. We want to put it somewhere. Well, the hippo tang, the regal tang, they tend to get to a certain size and start eating coral. This guy is really good, and the only thing he's messed with is any coral that I've tried to put near his hole that he likes to sleep into, and he will absolutely rip that down. And I wouldn't really call that eating the coral. Like he was ripping it off, but he wasn't really eating it. So he's not going around eating the fleshy coral or anything like that. But there's a chance that hippo tangs, regal tangs get to a certain age, and they will, probably with other tangs too, there's a certain age they get to, and they start getting a little more adventurous, and they can potentially eat coral. So where are we gonna put these fish when they get too big? And when this tank fills up a little bit more with coral, I don't think there's enough room for large tangs to swim around. So we gotta figure out something else. Actually, before I show you guys that, I need to plug my merch. Get yourself a clownfish yin and yang t-shirt. This is a good looking design, guys. Look at this. Clownfish yin and yang. That's the back. This is the front. This is actually a hand illustration that my sister did. So get this while it's in stock. I don't know how long that we're gonna make this one for. We'll be coming out with some more merch soon. So this is also 100% cotton. None of the polyester synthetic fibers or anything. This is 100% cotton. I just really wanted to have some unique merch for the channel that you don't see anywhere else, and that it's not overly branded. So you don't have to know what YouTube channel it is. You don't have to care. It's just a clownfish t-shirt that if you're into fish, if you're into aquariums, if you're into the ocean, if you're into animals, you can appreciate this t-shirt. So get one while they last. All right, back to it. New awesome project for the channel. Excuse the mess, the water change buckets from the 125 yesterday are still around, and we are babysitting African cichlids. So that's where we have water change buckets absolutely everywhere. But this is the 180 gallon tank that we will begin setting up very shortly. So I've got big plans for this tank. I'm not a fan of this color wood, so we're gonna paint the tank. Well, first, this area is actually, well, the whole garage. This is a garage. It's sloped, and there's a drain right there. So we've got to, and this is gonna be a full build video, so you can follow along and see exactly how I set this tank up. But we've got to solve the problem of this floor being extremely unlevel and sort of tilted towards the back. So we got to level the tank. We're going to paint the stand, paint the frame, which is this nasty plastic wood color that no one appreciates. This is no good, no good. The 125 actually was the same color. The frame and the stand were this brown color, and we're gonna do the same treatment. So it's gonna look just as good, only bigger. And if we look below the tank, we've got a bunch of buckets. This bucket, I think, is full of sand. This bucket is full of sand. We have rocks in some of these boxes. There's the tops for the tank right there. I made a video when I first got this tank, and if you remember that video, or I'll link it if you haven't seen it, I bought this tank for $5. We have a lot of sand. We have a lot of rocks. We're gonna do a 40 breeder sump, I think. We're gonna do a hang in the back overflow box, so I don't have to drill this tank because this is not going to be a permanent setup. So I don't actually wanna put a hole in it unless I'm sure that's where I want to put a hole.
That's what she said.
Higer was kind enough to send us this gyre pump that we're going to use in this tank, and this honestly probably is the only pump we need to put in here other than the return from the sump. I've done some calculations on my phone, and we have the numbers here. So this is going to be a super budget build. You guys might not be able to find a tank quite so cheap, but you can follow along with the other stuff I'm doing that's gonna make it just a crazy budget build. I mean, so like we're starting with nothing with the tank. We have probably all the sand we need, half the rocks we need. So we're gonna have to have maybe 30, 40 pounds of live rock, dry rock for the tank. So that's one expense. If I'm not including lights, the cost of the overflow box, the sump, the heater, the salt to fill it up, we gotta get a return pump, a kit for the sump. Basically all in, with no lights, we're looking at $343 to get this set up. So that would be to the point where, well, plus the cost of whatever the sump aquarium or whatever we pick for the sump is. We're gonna get this tank all set up and running with no lights because we don't really wanna run lights in the beginning anyway while it cycles. So the first part is going to be getting this tank up to 2025 looks, getting the plumbing set up, scaping the tank, filling it up, and getting it cycled and established, and getting it ready for what we plan on putting in here, which is going to be large fish, and by large I mean like relatively large angels, tangs, sharks, eels, stingrays, stuff like that. This is going to be sort of the large grow out tank for saltwater fish, predator fish, and in the future, when they outgrow this tank, we'll be forced to get a bigger tank, and that's fine. So we can move them to something bigger and nicer and better for the channel. What I'm trying to do on this channel is show you guys things that you haven't seen anywhere else. So the things we put in here aren't gonna be like your everyday saltwater tank, your common eels and bamboo sharks and whatever really boring saltwater fish that I'm not gonna put in here. I can tell you what we're gonna put in here, but I don't really want to jinx anything. I actually want it to be somewhat of a surprise for you as well as for me. One of the first things we put in here is gonna be some kind of smaller, more affordable schooling fish to just get the tank going and looking good so we can add some crazy stuff in the future. So that is one of the next very soon projects to come to the channel. I've been pretty busy lately, so I haven't uploaded a video in quite a long time, but these things are all gonna change because 2025 is going to be the best year for this channel. I have got some absolutely crazy stuff planned for 2025. So if you're interested, if you like this video, drop a like. If you wanna follow along, hit the subscribe button. For now, it's free. I can't tell you what it's gonna be like in the future, so hit subscribe if you wanna follow along. Until the next video, you can catch me on Instagram if you'd like, and I will see you guys very soon.